But back in the 80s, Ladbrokes had holiday camps up and down the country, and for the want of a better phrase, it's easier to call my mum's late partner is so clunky. Let's call him my stepdad. He was a really, really good singer, and he used to enter the talent competitions when we went on holiday every year and invariably win them. And I just kind of loved that whole world. And so I spent a couple of years as an entertainer. That led to jobs in travel and tourism, and I worked overseas for 6 years in Spain and Turkey and America. But the other love of my stepdad was horse racing. His family owned bookmaking shops in Sussex, and he, at the weekends, would be the board man in the shops. And midweek, if he got home from work early, he'd be watching the racing. And as a kid, I'd be kind of asking him, what are you getting so animated about? And this is back in the days of the ITV7. And so it's really interesting, isn't it, how people influence your life. This person's two sort of big influences were early days, the entertainment, and then more recently, the horse racing. And kind of fast forward to just before I started at Uttoxeter in 1994, I was earning a living, albeit a hand-to-mouth living, performing stand-up comedy in clubs in and around the Midlands. I was promoting comedy nights and performing at them and putting on music nights as well. But I'd recently got married, and my wife is much more sensible than me and more focused, and she was a teacher, and we got our first mortgage, and it seemed to be about the right time to get what I suppose my late mum would have said, a proper job.
Okay.
And a venue owner at one of the places I used to perform at cut out an advert for a job at Uttoxeter Racecourse and said, you should go for this. You love your racing, and you're a promoter, and it's kind of a very similar thing that they're looking for, someone who's got experience with consumers and putting on a show effectively. So I applied with looking back, the flakiest letter in the world, really, saying that this is me. I haven't really got much of a CV that relates to operating in racing and race courses, but I love the sport. I'm very keen. I think I've got something about me. Will you at least see me? And they did see me. I got an interview, and that was with the daughter of the owner of the racecourse, a gentleman called Sir Stanley Clark. And we kind of got on quite well at the interview, and she put me forward for a second interview with him, which was terrifying because he was a larger-than-life figure, very successful self-made man, very direct in his language. So Stan gave me a chance and said, there's something about you, so I'm going to give you an opportunity. Don't muck it up, although he used much more colourful language than that in expressing that to me. And that was 1994, and it was amazing to suddenly be in this full-time job on a race course, working inside a sport I'd followed for many years. And I kind of grew with the company, and we acquired a number of race courses over the following years, and Newcastle, Chepstow, and Hereford, Sedgefield, Brighton, Fontwell, Bath, Great Yarmouth. And I found myself years on as managing director of the company, overseeing 9 race courses, and we floated on the alternative investment market in 2003. And so that was kind of and I'm obviously fast tracking all of this because lots of things happened during those ensuing years, but that was my journey into the sport. And talking about sliding doors moments, I only learned later that my initial letter, the flaky letter I mentioned, went into the no pile. And it was only because they didn't have enough people to interview that they went through them and put it back into the maybe pile and eventually the yes pile. So who knows, had there not been that little moment of luck that we all need, I'd still be probably plying my trade to very small audiences in unappreciative clubs in the Midlands.
Well, it just shows the quirks of fate, doesn't it? It really does. Now, that's a really interesting background as to how you got into racing. When did you join Great British Racing, and what's your role there?
Well, joined Great British Racing ultimately in about 2009. So I'd left Northern Racing in 2008 when the company was sold and taken private again, and were sold to the Reuben brothers. And that company was then further integrated into arena racing and is now known as ARC. I took a bit of time off, which I was glad to do because it had been quite a long spell at one company. And I was approached by the then chief executive of the BHA, Nick Coward, who asked me to oversee a project on racing's brand and marketing. And it was a temporary thing. It was just meant to be a few weeks and a couple of sort of papers produced. But that became something very different. It became initially a project known as Racing for Change,
Yeah.
which had quite a few detractors at the time because it had the word change in the title, which invariably upsets people. But that kind of solidified into something formal, and Great British Racing was kind of the outcome of that initial project. So it's since 2009 that I've been involved with the company, and as chief executive on a sort of a formal basis since I think 2010.
Okay. And you also have a big role in the British Champions Series. Can you tell us a little bit about that as well?
Of course, British Champion Series promotes 35 of the top flat races in the UK, mostly Group 1s, with the exception of a couple of the staying races, which are Group 2 in their status. And it all leads to a big day, which we've recently held at Ascot, which is Kipco British Champions Day. And the purpose of Kipco British Champions Series is to shine a light on the best quality racing, and to bring to life those really important and iconic assets that we've got. It includes the 5 classic races. It includes all of the Group 1s at Royal Ascot, and those big races at the other festivals, be it Newbury or York or Goodwood, that are significant and important to the sport. And when this company was formed back in, again, 2010, before its launch in 2011, the notion was that the flat season kind of petered out a little bit at the end. It was full of amazing moments, and it's a long season, but it kind of went out, more with a whimper than a bang. And the focus of the shareholders in that company, the Jockey Club and Ascot, and those other courses I've just mentioned to you, was that we created a finale day for the flat, and a big end to the European flat season. I think there's only one more Group 1 race in Europe for older horses after Champions Day, so it does feel like a real end of term event. And the development of that day came out as part of the project that I initially was overseeing on Racing for Change, because one of the strategic pillars was about promotion of premier racing, and so the connection is to that. And of course, because Great British Racing has promotional resources and capabilities in digital marketing and communications, the company oversees much of what BCS does as well. So it's kind of I do wear 2 hats, but they mix quite naturally, and we've got very, very similar set of shareholders across the company. In fact, Great British Racing is a 15% shareholder in Champion Series, so it all works relatively well.
Okay, that's interesting. I have to say, you touched upon earlier that sometimes people are a bit resistant to change, but I do think the racing public have really embraced Champions Day, haven't they, in the Champion Series? Would you go along with that? I think they've really got behind it now.
I feel they have. We can always improve. We've talked about that in the build up to this 10th anniversary race meeting that we just had, and I feel the card could do with a 7th race. I think punters would particularly like that. I know the race goers would. I think they feel the day ends a bit too abruptly, but yes, it does feel supported. And something that made me feel incredibly old the other day was that I was on an interview with Rishi Persad, and preceding me was the jockey David Egan. And it turned out that he was 12 years old when the first Champions Day was run. And you kind of realise that some youngsters have grown up with this day. If you're of a certain age, it's kind of always been there.
Now, Phil and I have spoken a lot in the past, Rod, about National Racehorse Week. That happened recently. It was a huge success. I was involved in it, and I'm very happy to be involved. Can you give us some stats? Can you give us some figures on how many people attended, how many yards were open, and then talk a little bit about the plans for next year?
Yeah, I'm happy to. I must caveat that by telling you that we have to report into the funding partners of National Racehorse Week in a couple of weeks' time, and I should probably reserve some of that reporting for them. They probably need to hear it first, but I can generalise, so it's okay. I'm sure I can give you enough insight that doesn't get me into any hot water with them.
No, that'd be appreciated. We wouldn't want that.
But I mean, overall, we feel it was a tremendous success. I think in the region of 130 plus yards opened up, including those opened through their open weekends. It was brilliant that it was bookended between the Epsom and Malton Open days, and at the other end of it, the Henry Cecil weekend in Newmarket, with stables, large and small, flattened jumps opening up and doing it in their very own unique way around the country. We know over 11,000 places signed up in advance of the week taking place, and I can give that stat out because I think we published that quite close to the event. And we were actually, fully subscribed. And one of the challenges we have for 222 is making sure we create more capacity because there was such demand. Some of the figures I can't give yet because they do deserve to be heard by the funders first, are all very positive. We achieved, I think, every single target we set for the campaign, bar one, and we will report publicly on that. And so actually what I should say is when we've reported to the funders, we're going to publish full details of National Racehorse Week to the general public, because we think racing particularly needs to own this and feel that they've created a really important week for the sport. And so that we want total transparency, and that will include lessons learned as well as all the good things. What we've learned in year one, it's really important that, just in terms of proof of concept, that this idea that was born out of Richard Phillips, and a brilliant idea it was brought to life and was deliverable and had legs, and that we could build on. And so delighted with year one. Wonderful that so many people engage with it, particularly people less close to the sport than are simply our aficionados. It was terrific that it felt like this industry, as you know, loves to fight and loves to fight in public sometimes. It was nice that this was a unifying theme, that we actually had people here all agreeing that this was a really good idea. And what was driving it, or certainly one of the factors, you'll remember racing's sort of deep shock and sadness at the images that related to Gordon Elliott back in February of this year. The sport wanted to tell a different story and say, this isn't us, this isn't how we treat horses, this isn't who we are. But of course, no expression of dismay or incredulity is effective as showing people. So this was a big exercise in racing opening its doors and saying, come and have a look. And it was so good. I went up to a local one. It felt very appropriate for me. I live in the Midlands. I went up to Sarah Hollinshead's yard. And she did such a good job, and she had people there to help newcomers. She put on a hog roast and tea and coffee and a cake stand that was raising money for Racing Welfare and Injured Jockeys Fund, and just done in her style, on her terms, but with real warmth. And it was I think that was reflected up and down the country in terms of the participation. And anecdotally, quite a bit of feedback that there was interest shown in getting involved in the horses there, and syndicates and clubs, and that wasn't the driving, the main priority for National Racehorse Week. But it's a nice kind of incremental bit of news that it was actually maybe winning a few new owners along the way. What were your experiences of it? I'd love to hear your view.
Well, I was involved with Dean Ivory, and we did a similar thing. So I run Solaria Racing Syndicates, and we had sort of limited numbers there because we wanted to be able to talk to a lot of